Case 1. Estibaliz Carranza Zabala, Vienna, Austria. A sunny afternoon in 2008. Children are playing outside. The ice cream shop on the corner is busy. Inside her apartment, Goidsargi Estibaliz Carranza is sitting across the room from her ex-husband, Holger Holtz. She pulls out a .22 caliber Beretta pistol. She shoots him 3 times in the head. Then her phone rings. It is her staff at the ice cream parlor. She is needed at work. Carranza, born in Mexico, raised between Spain and Austria, was 30 years old, and the friendly face behind a shop called Schleckeria. Customers loved her. Nobody suspected a thing. She couldn't get rid of the body in time. Her first attempt to burn Holtz failed, so she picked up a chainsaw instead. She dismembered him. She cleaned the apartment. Then she went back to scooping ice cream. 2 years later, she did it again. In November 2010, after a drunken argument, she retrieved the Beretta from under her mattress and shot her boyfriend Manfred Hinterberger while he had his back turned. He was snoring when she pulled the trigger. She told investigators she asked him to forgive her, then dismembered him too. The remains of both men ended up encased in concrete in the shop's cellar. In June 2011, maintenance workers discovered human heads and body parts hidden beneath the floor. Carranza fled to Italy. She was caught days later and extradited back to Austria. At trial, a court-appointed psychiatrist described her as highly dangerous with 2 faces and serious psychological abnormalities. She appeared in court in a gray dress and glasses, speaking softly. In 2012, Carranza was convicted of both murders. She was sentenced to life in prison. As of February 2026, Estibaliz Carranza Zabala remains incarcerated in an Austrian prison. She is 47 years old. Case 2. Tina LaSonia Brown, March 24, 2010, Ensley, Florida. 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman thought she was spending the day with friends. She was watching movies at Tina Brown's house. Adriana was a married mother. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Tina Brown, 39, had a grievance. Months earlier, Adriana had allegedly used a stun gun on Brown's daughter during a fight. That wasn't something Brown was willing to forget. In Brown's home, 3 people, Tina, her teenage daughter Brittany, and a neighbor named Heather Lee, surrounded Adriana. They beat her repeatedly with a crowbar. They shocked her with a taser. Then they shoved her into the trunk of a car, and they drove her to a wooded area off Lepley Avenue and doused her in gasoline. They set her on fire and walked away. But Adriana Zimmerman did not die. With 60% of her body burned, she ran from the woods. She found a house. She sat on the front steps and waited. When rescuers arrived, she named every one of her attackers. They tased me, they beat me in the head with a crowbar and set me on fire. Brown was arrested that same day, but she wasn't done. From jail, she contacted a woman in Wisconsin and asked her to go to the hospital and finish off Adriana before she could testify. That woman went straight to police instead. Adriana Zimmerman died 16 days later in a burn ward in Alabama. The only parts of her body untouched by fire were her right ankle and calf. In June 2012, a jury found Brown guilty of first-degree murder. The jury was unanimous, 12-0 for death. On September 28, 2012, Tina Brown was sentenced to death. As of February 2026, Tina Brown remains on death row at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida. She has served over 13 years. Case 3. Els Clottemans, November 18, 2006. Belgium. A Cessna aircraft climbs to 13,000 feet over the countryside. Inside are 4 skydivers, including 37-year-old Els van Doren, a mother of 2, a jewelry shop owner, a woman with over 2,300 jumps. Also on that plane, her close friend, Els Clottemans, a 22-year-old elementary school teacher. The woman the victim had nicknamed Babs, so people could tell them apart. They were both in love with the same man, Marcel Summers. Van Doren didn't know that. Clottemans did. The door of the aircraft opens, the skydivers jump. 3 of them link hands in free fall. The Clottemans hangs back, watching from above. At 4,000 feet, they pull their chutes. Van Doren's primary parachute fails. She frantically reaches for her reserve. That fails too. She plunges at 120 miles per hour into a suburban garden in Opglabik. She dies on impact. A helmet camera captured the entire fall, including her desperate attempts to pull the canopy open. Investigators found that 2 key cords in the parachute had been cut. Experts said it would have taken no more than 30 seconds with a pair of scissors. The opportunity? 1 week earlier, the trio had spent the weekend at Marcel Summers' apartment in Eindhoven. Van Doren slept in the bedroom with him. Clottemans slept on the sofa. The parachute was stored in the hallway. 1 month after Van Doren's death, Clottemans was called in for a second police statement. In hours before she was due to appear, she attempted suicide. She became the prime suspect immediately. In October 2010, after a 4-hour jury deliberation, Clottemans was found guilty of premeditated murder. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. As of the most recent available records, Els Clottemans is serving her 30-year sentence in a Belgian prison. She would be eligible for release around 2040 when she is in her mid-50s. Case 4. Joyce LeMay Cohen, March 7th, 1986, Coconut Grove, Miami. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Joyce Cohen calls 911. She is screaming. Her husband has been shot. Stanley Cohen, 52, was a millionaire property developer. He was found in the master bedroom of their mansion with 3 bullets in his head. A 4th had grazed his scalp. Joyce had grown up in foster care, bouncing from home to home. At 24, she became a secretary at a construction company owned by Stanley Cohen. He was 40. He dumped his fiancée to marry her. She went from welfare and clerical jobs to a Coconut Grove mansion, a 650-acre ranch in Colorado, and what friends described as a near-constant presence at the most exclusive clubs in Miami. But by 1986, the fairy tale was rotting. Stanley was having an affair and threatening divorce. If he left, Joyce would lose everything. She told police 3 intruders had broken in, but the burglar alarm had been manually shut off. The family guard dog was locked in a back room with Joyce. Nothing had been stolen, not the cash, not the cocaine on the table. Powder residue was found on Joyce's hands. A tissue in the garbage contained mucus and gunpowder residue. And a witness named Frank Zuccarello told investigators that Joyce had met him in a parking lot months earlier to plan the murder, offering $100,000 to $150,000 in cocaine as payment. Joyce was not arrested for 2.5 years. When police found her, she was living in a trailer park in Virginia with a new boyfriend. In November 1989, she was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 15 years. As of February 2026, Joyce Cohen remains incarcerated. She became eligible for parole in 2014. No release has been granted. Case 5, Stacy Castor, early 2000, Clay, New York. Michael Wallace, 38, dies at home. He'd been feeling unwell for weeks, unsteady, swollen, struggling. His wife Stacy refuses an autopsy. Doctors call it a heart attack. The case is closed. 3 years later, Stacy marries David Castor when he owns his own business. She works alongside him. Then, in August 2005, David locks himself in the bedroom. Stacy says they had an argument and she hasn't seen him since. 2 days pass. On the third day, she calls the sheriff. Officers find David Castor dead in the bedroom with a container of antifreeze and a half-full glass of bright green liquid by the bed. That's when investigators found something that changed everything. Stacy's fingerprints were on the glass. David's were not. Police exhume Michael Wallace's body. Calcium oxalate crystals, the physical signature of antifreeze poisoning, are found in both men's kidneys. But Stacy had a plan. In September 2007, she called her daughter Ashley home from college, told her to relax, and poured her drinks. A second day, more drinks. On the third day, Ashley's younger sister Bree found her comatose in bed. A suicide note sat nearby, confessing to killing both of her mother's husbands. The note misspelled antifreeze as anti-free 4 times. The same unique misspelling detectives had heard Stacy use in every single police interview. Stacy Castor was convicted in February 2009. She was sentenced to 51 years to life. Stacy Castor died in prison on June 11, 2016, from a heart attack at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. She had served 7 years. Case 6, Judias Anna Buenoano, September 15, 1971, Orlando, Florida. U.S. Air Force Sergeant James Goodyear dies in a naval hospital after weeks of mysterious symptoms that doctors cannot explain. His wife, Judias, collects $85,000 from 3 life insurance policies 5 days later. Then a fire destroys their home. It's another $90,000 payout. Judias moves the family to Pensacola. She changes her name to Buenoano, a corrupted Spanish translation of Goodyear. Nobody makes the connection. Her son Michael joins the army and becomes severely ill while stationed at Fort Benning. Doctors discover he has been slowly poisoned with arsenic, enough to leave him paralyzed, requiring 15 pounds of metal leg and arm braces just to move. On May 13, 1980, Judias takes Michael canoeing on the East River near Pensacola. The canoe capsizes. Judias and her other son surface. Michael, weighed down by 15 pounds of metal, sinks. He drowns. He was 19. Then comes 1983. Judias announces she is pregnant by her fiancé, John Gentry. He goes out to buy champagne. When he starts his car, a bomb explodes. He survives barely, and he tells police that Judias had been giving him vitamins to support his health. The pills contain arsenic and formaldehyde. Investigators realize Buenoano is Spanish for Goodyear. They exhume James Goodyear's body 12 years after his death. It is full of arsenic. Judias Buenoano was convicted of 3 separate crimes across 3 trials. She spent 13 years on death row, crocheting baby blankets and claiming she was a born-again Christian. On March 30th, 1998, Judias Buenoano was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. She was 54 years old. She was the first woman executed in Florida in 150 years. Case 7. Beth Ann Carpenter. March 10, 1994. East Lyme, Connecticut. A man named Anson Clinton is lured to a remote stretch of highway by someone who wants to buy his tow truck. He is shot 5 times at close range. When the shooter brings his 15-year-old son along to watch, Anson Clinton, 28, was a nurse's assistant and former exotic dancer. He was also the husband of Kim Carpenter and the brother-in-law of Beth Ann Carpenter, a rising attorney specializing in real estate law. Beth hated him. She believed he was a deadbeat who had no business raising her niece, 3-year-old Rebecca. She and her parents had gone to court to try to take custody of the child. They lost. Clinton won. According to her boss and lover Hyman Clean, Beth did not take that loss quietly. She begged him to have Clinton killed. She told him that if he truly loved her, he would do it. Klein arranged for his drug dealer Mark Desprez to execute the plan. Desprez brought his own teenage son to the scene of the murder. By 1995, investigators were closing in, and Beth Carpenter fled to Ireland. She lived there for 2 years, helped police locate Clean hiding in California, and was eventually arrested in Dublin while leaving a gym. After a prolonged extradition battle, Beth returned to the U.S. in 1999. Her trial began in 2002. The jury rejected her defense that Clean had acted alone to impress her. They convicted her on all counts. On August 1st, 2002, Beth Ann Carpenter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release. As of February 2026, Beth Ann Carpenter remains incarcerated at the Janet S. York Correctional Institution in Connecticut. She is 62 years old. All appeals have been rejected. Case 8. Lisa Jo Chamberlain. March 20th, 2004. Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Lisa Jo Chamberlain and her boyfriend Roger Gillett are living in the home of Vernon Hewlett and his girlfriend, Linda Heinzelman. They are hiding from drug charges in Kansas. Their plan: rob the couple, steal enough money to run to Mexico. Vernon Hewlett won't give up the combination to his lockbox. Linda Heinzelman, described as having a learning disability, can't remember it. So Gillett picks up a hammer. The force of the blows on Vernon Hewlett is so extreme that the metal handle of the hammer bends. Linda Heinzelman survives the initial attack. She is still alive the next day, and the day after that. On March 22nd, 2 days later, she is finally killed when she is suffocated with a pillow. Then came the task of disposing of the bodies. Chamberlain and Gillett dismembered them, packed them into a chest freezer, sealed the lid with gray duct tape, and loaded it into a truck. They drove nearly 1,000 miles, 15 hours, back to Kansas. When they pulled into a shed on an abandoned farm, plugged the freezer into the wall, and stayed nearby. Police executing a warrant for a meth lab found the freezer. The bodies were so frozen it took more than 72 hours for them to thaw enough for an autopsy. A former inmate later testified that Chamberlain showed no remorse in jail, saying they should have disposed of the bodies better, like feeding them to the hogs. Chamberlain was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder in August 2006. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection. As of February 2026, Lisa Jo Chamberlain remains on death row at the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility. Case 9. Linda Calvey. November 19th, 1990. Plaistow, East London. Linda Calvey picks up two men in a single morning, each from a different prison. The first is Daniel Reese, her new lover, and the second is Ronnie Cook, her old one. By late morning, all three are inside Linda's home. Within minutes, Ronnie Cook is shot dead in the kitchen. Linda Calvey grew up in working-class East London. When her first husband, Mickey, was shot and killed by police during a botched robbery in 1978, something in her shifted. She graduated from getaway driver to armed robber. She did time. She kept dangerous company. Ronnie Cook was a notorious East London gangster who financially supported her after Mickey's death, but also controlled her, monitored her movements, and dictated how she dressed. Linda had grown tired of him. The prosecution alleged Linda paid Reese £10,000 to carry out the killing. When Reese hesitated, Linda allegedly took the gun herself and shot Cook at point-blank range while he was kneeling. Her defense told a different story. An unknown hitman burst in, shouted, "Get down, police!" and killed Cook before anyone could react. The jury didn't believe it. Linda Calvey was convicted of murder in November 1991. She served 18.5 years across 14 different prisons, where she cut Myra Hindley's hair and received a marriage proposal from Reggie Cray. She was released in 2008. She married a millionaire businessman in 2009. She became an author. Her husband died in 2015. As of 2026, Linda Calvey lives in Chigwell, Essex. She is 77 years old and has never admitted guilt. Case 10. Linda Charbonneau. September 23, 2001. Bridgeville, Delaware. Linda Charbonneau calls her former partner John with an urgent message. Someone is breaking into their old home. He needs to come immediately. John arrives, and Willie Brown, the boyfriend of Linda's daughter, Melissa, attacks him. John cries out to Linda to stop it. She does nothing. Brown loads John into Linda's van. Melissa drives. They take him to a prepared grave near Angola, Delaware. Brown beats him to death. John Charbonneau was 62 years old. He and Linda had spent 20 years together raising a family. After leaving him, Linda had married his own nephew, Billy Sproats. Now Billy was asking uncomfortable questions about where John had gone. On October 17, 2001, Linda tells Brown and Melissa that something has to be done about Billy. He is lured home. Brown waits inside. Multiple stab wounds, blunt force trauma, and asphyxiation. Billy's body is transported back to the Bridgeville property and buried in the backyard of the house where his uncle had once lived. An autopsy would later find dirt in Billy's lungs. He was still breathing when he was put in the ground. The investigation broke open when Willie Brown confessed and led police to the second grave. John Charbonneau's blood was found in Linda's van. His ID was discovered in a diaper bag at the next house she moved into. Linda Charbonneau was convicted of both murders in April 2004 and sentenced to death. In 2006, the Delaware Supreme Court ordered a new trial due to procedural errors. The case was remanded, and her death sentence was overturned. As of the most recent available records, the final resolution of Linda Charbonneau's case following the 2006 reversal remains a matter of ongoing legal proceedings in Delaware. Case 11. Carol Bundy. Summer 1980, Los Angeles. A series of young women are being murdered along the Sunset Strip, but the killer is Douglas Clark. But he doesn't act entirely alone. Carol Bundy was 38 years old, legally blind without her glasses, a former nurse, a mother of two, and entirely under the influence of the men around her. When she met Clark at a country western bar in January 1980, he moved in that same night. By that summer, she was handing him the murder weapon. She assisted Clark in the killing of at least one woman along the Strip. She later admitted to handing him the gun used in the attack. But Carol wasn't just a passive figure in the background. In August 1980, she invited her former lover, John Jack Murray, a 45-year-old apartment manager and part-time country singer, into her car. She decapitated him. She brought his severed head home. She used it to taunt Clark. And it was the killing of Murray that ultimately unraveled everything. Carol began confessing to co-workers. Details leaked. Police were notified. She gave a full statement that implicated both herself and Clark. Carol Bundy pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder in 1983. She was sentenced to 52 years to life in prison. Carol Bundy died in prison on December 9th, 2003, from heart failure. She had served 20 years. She was 61 years old. Case 12, Amelia Carr, February 2009, Boardman, Florida. 26-year-old Amelia Carr and her fiancé Joshua Fulgham lure a young woman named Heather Strong to a storage trailer behind Carr's mother's home. Inside the trailer, Carr attempts to break Strong's neck. When that fails, they bind her to a computer chair with duct tape and place a black plastic bag over her head. Heather Strong was 26 years old, and she was a mother of 2. She worked at an iron skillet restaurant near Interstate 75. She was also the estranged wife of Joshua Fulgham, the man Amelia Carr was now engaged to. 1 month after meeting Carr, Fulgham had married Heather instead. Then he kicked Carr out. Then he reconciled with Heather. Then Carr threatened Heather with a knife to drop assault charges against Fulgham. Then Heather began seeing someone else. The motive was simple and lethal. Carr wanted Heather gone permanently. Heather Strong's body was discovered in a shallow grave on March 19, 2009. She had been missing for over a month. Carr gave authorities 10 different statements without a lawyer, each time changing her story. A secretly recorded conversation with Fulgham's sister revealed the specific details of the crime. And Carr was convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping on December 7, 2010. On February 22, 2011, Amelia Carr was sentenced to death. She was the first woman sentenced to death in Marion County since serial killer Aileen Wuornos in 1992. As of February 2026, Amelia Carr remains on death row at Lowell Correctional Institution Annex in Florida. Case 13, Rebecca Bryan, September 20th, 2011, Mustang, Oklahoma. On her drive home from a work conference in Tulsa, Rebecca Bryan makes one stop, at a client's home in McLeod. She has sex with him. It is the 3rd man she has slept with in 4 days. That night at approximately 10 p.m., she returns home to 1320 West Rose Hill Drive. Her husband, Keith Bryan, 52, is on the couch watching television. Rebecca retrieves a Ruger .380 pistol. She shoots Keith once in the head. Keith Bryan was the fire chief of Nichols Hills, Oklahoma. He was described by friends as dedicated, well-respected, and devoted to his wife of 33 years. Rebecca later told police he was the most amazing husband. She told investigators a different story. An intruder had broken in through the garage, shot Keith, apologized, and said Keith should have hired him before fleeing in a small dark pickup. Rebecca claimed she chased him out. The evidence told a different story. Inside the clothes dryer in the utility room, investigators found the gun, a spent shell casing, a latex glove with Rebecca's DNA, and a fire-themed blanket with bullet holes, the same blanket that had been on the back of the couch. And investigators had already found 7 voicemail messages from that same evening, one of them left by Rebecca for her former lover, telling him she still loved him and expected a large inheritance soon. Rebecca Bryan was convicted of first-degree murder in May 2013. On July 9th, 2013, she was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. As of February 2026, Rebecca Bryan remains incarcerated in an Oklahoma state prison. She continues to maintain her innocence. Case 14, Doris Carlson. October 23, 1996. Peoria, Arizona. Doris Carlson visits her mother-in-law, Mary Lynn, at her residential care facility. She brings documents. She needs the elderly woman to sign over her annuity, money that has been keeping Doris and her husband afloat. Mary Lynn, who suffers from multiple sclerosis, refuses to sign without consulting her financial advisor. Doris leaves in a fury. The next day, Doris tells their 20-year-old boarder and Dan McReekin Mary Lynn needed to be killed really soon. She hands him the key to the care facility apartment. She's already provided him money to buy gloves. She has already driven both Dan and their 17-year-old boarder, Scott Smith, to scope out the building. After midnight on October 25th, Dan and Scott enter the apartment. Scott moves the furniture to stage a burglary. Dan closes his eyes and stabs Mary Lynn 8 to 10 times in the throat and upper body. He returns to the car. Doris asks, "Did you do it?" They drive home, but Mary Lynn Carlson was not dead. When a nursing assistant found her at 5 a.m., she was conscious. Her first words were to call the nurse by name and say she had fought back as hard as she could. Mary Lynn survived for 6 months before dying from her injuries on April 21st, 1997. Doris Carlson was convicted of first-degree murder in 1999 and sentenced to death. Following the 2002 Ring versus Arizona U.S. Supreme Court ruling, her death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. As of February 2026, Doris Carlson remains incarcerated in the Arizona Department of Corrections. Case 15, Attina, Cannaday. June 3, 1982. A gravel road north of Biloxi, Mississippi, called Lampkin Road. In the early hours of the morning, a white van pulls off the highway and stops. A U.S. Air Force sergeant named Ronald Wojcik, 26, is forced out of the vehicle at knife point and led into the woods. He does not come back. The woman who orchestrated his abduction was 16 years old. Attina Marie Cannaday had run away from home in Alabama at 13. She was married and divorced by 14. Yes, by the time she met Wojcik at the sports bar where he worked part-time, she was living with him. When he discovered she was underage and ended the relationship, she did not accept it. Cannaday spent the night of the crime drinking and dancing at a hotel lounge. Just before closing, she recruited 2 others, David Gray and a woman called Dawn Bushart. She led them to Wojcik's apartment. At knife point, Wojcik and his girlfriend were forced into his own van. His children were left asleep in the apartment. During the drive, the attack continued. On Lampkin Road, Wojcik was forced into the woods and fatally attacked. In jail, a guard overheard Cannaday laughing with another inmate about taking the victim's head home as a trophy. That testimony became a key piece of evidence at trial. In 1983, Cannaday was sentenced to death. In 1984, the Mississippi Supreme Court reversed the death sentence due to a constitutional violation and resentenced her to life. Attina Cannaday was released on parole on March 9, 2008. The 1990 TV movie Too Young to Die, starring Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis, was loosely based on her story. Case 16. Carol Carr, June 8, 2002, Griffin, Georgia. 63-year-old Carol Carr walks into the Sunbridge nursing home carrying a .25 caliber handgun. She enters the room shared by her 2 adult sons. She shoots both of them in the head. Then she walks to the lobby. She sits down. She waits for the police. Michael Randy Scott was 42. Andy Byron Scott was 41. Both were in the advanced stages of Huntington's disease. Bedridden, unable to speak, unable to move or feed themselves. Carol had lived inside this nightmare for decades. Her husband, Hoyt, had died from the same hereditary disease in 1995 after more than 20 years of decline, during which she cared for him entirely alone. His brother had committed suicide when he found out he carried the gene. His sister had already died from it. Carol had watched her sons receive the same diagnosis. She had placed them in the nursing home when their needs exceeded what she could provide at home. She visited constantly, changed their linens herself, and brought them drinks. On one occasion before the shooting, she had tried to help them end their lives with pills. That attempt failed. In 1995, all 3 of her sons had signed living wills, stating they did not want to live if they reached the same state as their father. 2 of them never got the chance to exercise that wish themselves. Carol pleaded guilty to a little-used Georgia law against assisting in the commission of suicide. She was sentenced to 5 years. She served 21 months. She was released on parole in March 2004. No further public records document Carol Carr's life after her release. She was 65 years old when she walked out of Metro State Prison. Case 17. Barbara Burns, August 15, 2004, St. Petersburg, Florida. Before dawn, Barbara Burns takes a .38 caliber revolver from her dresser drawer and walks to the single bed next to hers. Her sister Debbie is sleeping. Barbara shoots her once in the forehead. Then she moves to a different bedroom. She turns the air conditioner to maximum. She buys dozens of air fresheners, the cardboard kind, the plug-in kind, and scatters potpourri across the room. She keeps going to work. She cashes Debbie's Social Security checks. She lives this way for 6 weeks. Deborah Burns was 40 years old and had the mind of a 6-year-old. At age 2, she contracted scarlet fever that caused permanent brain damage. For 40 years, almost her entire life, Barbara was her caregiver. They shared a bedroom, sleeping in single beds side by side. Barbara was 16 when she dropped out of school to care for Debbie because her mother had to work. She never had close friends. She never had a social life. Her world was Debbie, obsessed with Star Wars, soap operas, and Snow White, and prone to demanding tantrums when she didn't get her way. The money ran out in 2003. They had spent Debbie's $350,000 inheritance on celebrity fan trips and a mobile home. Barbara was filing for bankruptcy and working at Lowe's for $7 an hour on Debbie's 40th birthday. They fought about premium cable channels they couldn't afford. In October 2004, Barbara abandoned her van at a bus station and bought a one-way ticket to Virginia. She lived in a homeless shelter that winter. She was arrested in Virginia Beach in May 2005. In 2006, Barbara Burns pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years. Her lead detective famously called her the nicest murderer I've ever met. Based on the 15-year sentence handed down in 2006, Barbara Burns would likely have been released between 2018 and 2021, after serving approximately 12 years with credit for time served. Case 18, Shelley Casterline, October 4th, 2013. Guide Rock, Nebraska. Virginia Barone, 68 years old, has just done something kind. She has driven her son, Ronald, and his girlfriend, Shelley Casterline, each all the way from Hastings to her home. She is a mother helping her family. An argument breaks out between Virginia and Shelley. Shelley becomes what investigators would later describe as enraged. She grabs a knife. She stabs Virginia Barone 22 times, 2 in the back, 20 in the chest, torso, and stomach. Then Shelley and her son Andrew move the body and cover it with boards inside the house. They take Virginia's white Pontiac Grand Prix and burglarize a house 1 block away, stealing a 51-inch television and an Xbox 360. They pawn the items for cash. That evening, a Nebraska state trooper pulls them over on Interstate 80. Andrew is driving under the influence. He is arrested. Shelley is right there in the passenger seat. The next morning, before Virginia's body has even been found, Shelley posts Andrew's bond and gets him released, and they steal a Jeep and flee toward Iowa. In a Walmart parking lot in Newton, Iowa, Andrew snatches a woman's purse. Local citizens chase him. Shelley jumps out of the car brandishing a knife to help him escape. Within minutes, Iowa State Patrol has them both. Shelley Casterline pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in March 2014. On September 22, 2014, she was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. As of February 2026, Shelley Casterline remains incarcerated. She has served over 11 years. Case 19, Rosalind Brown, April 12, 1985. Flint, Michigan. 11-year-old Christopher Brown is playing basketball in front of his father and stepmother's home on Harvard Street. He is there for Easter break. He is described by his mother as a bright-eyed boy who loved Ms. Pac-Man. He is seen being helped inside the house by his stepmother Rosalind and her brother, Montel Pettiford. He cannot walk on his own. Montel gives him a clear liquid from a brown bottle and mixes the same liquid into eggs that a witness is told to feed him. Christopher complains his stomach hurts. An hour or two later, Rosalind and Montel are seen carrying Christopher, unconscious, out of the house. They return without him. Their shoes and pants are muddy and wet. Christopher Brown's body is pulled from the Flint River on April 30th, 1985. He is still wearing the same blue jeans, maroon jacket, and white shoes he disappeared in. The original death certificate lists accidental drowning. Christopher's mother, Brenda Simpson, spent the next 23 years refusing to accept that verdict. She carried her son's hospital ID anklets to court when she carried a photo still stained with water that had dripped from the flowers on his casket. In 2004, the case was officially reopened. Christopher's body was exhumed. A 2005 autopsy found ethanol, isopropanol, and acetone in his blood, enough to incapacitate a child. Critically, mud was found in his lungs, but not his stomach. He was unconscious before he entered the water. Rosalind Brown and Montel Pettiford were arrested in May 2007, 22 years after the murder. They were convicted by separate juries in August 2008 and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, Rosalind looked at the court and said, "I'll be back soon." She has never been released. As of February 2026, Rosalind Brown remains incarcerated in the Michigan Department of Corrections. She is 69 years old. Case 20. Dorothia Binham, October 16th, 1998. Burlington, North Carolina. 10-year-old Tiffany Long calls her grandmother from a neighbor's house at 3:30 in the afternoon to ask permission to visit a friend. Her grandmother says yes. That is the last time anyone in Tiffany's family speaks to her. At 6 p.m., her grandmother comes home and finds her missing. At 8:20, she calls the police. Investigators find Tiffany's body behind a garage on Lakeside Avenue, hidden under a brown curtain, just before 5 o'clock in the morning. Tiffany had written a note expressing romantic feelings for a 16-year-old boy at her church. His girlfriend, 17-year-old Dorothia Binham, found out about it. She decided to teach Tiffany a lesson. Dorothea recruited 2 others, the boy, Harold Jones, and his 13-year-old cousin, Joseph Jones. That afternoon, the 3 of them encountered Tiffany. Yet what began as a plan to scare her became something far worse. Tiffany was taken to a vacant house on Lakeside Avenue and subjected to a brutal assault that lasted hours. The crime unraveled when a teacher contacted police after hearing Dorothea Binham mention in passing that Tiffany had been strangled with a TV cable cord. That detail hadn't been released to the public. DNA evidence, blood-stained clothing, and the witness accounts of multiple people placed all 3 suspects at the scene. On February 14th, 2000, Valentine's Day, Dorothea Binham pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and related charges. She was sentenced to a minimum of 124 years, maximum 150 years in prison. As of February 2026, Dorothea Binham remains incarcerated at the Southern Correctional Institution in Troy, North Carolina. A love letter killed a child. And Dorothea Binham will spend the rest of her life in prison for it. Behind every one of these crimes was someone who seemed ordinary, someone who seemed safe. Remember that. If this documentary gave you something to think about, subscribe, share it, and stay alert. This has been Crime Lens. We'll see you in the next one.